Hello, everybody. Welcome. I see everybody starting to roll in. That's great. Welcome. Welcome to the Hyperspace Challenge 2025 webinar series. This is a part of an ongoing series hosted by the Hyperspace Challenge, Air Force Research Lab, and the U.S. Space Force to strengthen the connective tissue between diverse communities within the space industry. The goal of today's event is to help guide you through the critical steps of turning innovative ideas into viable space products by exploring key project management strategies. Just really glad to be joined by this amazing panel today of expert project managers who are here to offer their insight and their wisdom. As you guys are listening to everybody speak and talk and everything like that, please do submit your questions through the Q&A portion, which you can find down there at the bottom of the screen. If you do put a question in the chat, we'll ask you to please transfer it over to the Q&A. So just easier to start with Q&A first. Please also put your name in the chat. Tell us where you're from. We want to know where you guys are calling from. And we may even pick one to feature on social media. So give us your name and where you're from. Thank you to the panel again. And I'm going to introduce Eric Miller from PADT. He's going to be our moderator today. He's going to lead this great discussion. Eric, I want to hand it over to you now. Take the show away. You're on mute.
Muted myself. Yeah, I muted myself so you wouldn't hear me breathing, and then I forgot to unmute myself. As always, and Nathan's laughing because he knows I do it all the time. My name is Eric Miller, and I really want to welcome everybody who's attending to kind of learn a topic that we don't really talk about enough. And it's one of those things that if you have project management, you can take it for granted. And if you don't, you realize that you shouldn't take it for granted. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Like I said, my name is Eric Miller. I'm one of the owners here at a company called PADT. We're based in Tempe, Arizona, with offices across the Southwest. We do a lot of business in New Mexico as well. And what we do is mechanical engineering products and services. We sell ANSYS and Stratasys and EOS. That's simulation software and then 3D printers. And then we also do consulting in that we help people design their products. We do simulation for folks, and then we do 3D printing as a service. So project management is a very important part of our consulting as well as even our sales process. We project manage that as much as we can as well to try and make sure that we're efficient and get things done on time. So that's enough about me. Let's go ahead and go around the room. And Nirav, I'm just gonna go across the top of the screen here. I'm gonna start with you. If you can let everybody know, your background and all that stuff.
Awesome. Hi everyone. My name is Nirav Mehta. I'm our lead mission manager here at Apex Space. We're out in Playa Vista, just 10 minutes north of LAX. We build the standard configurable satellite bus. And so if you go on our website, you can see that you can configure a satellite bus just like you're configuring an F-150 or a Tesla Model 3. And we offer those at a fixed price to anyone who wants to come buy a satellite. Been at Apex for a little over a year and a half. And before this, did program management at Rocket Lab and Terran Orbital. And before that, grew up in systems engineering at Northrop Grumman. So seeing the big company, the small company, startup world, and then new space and old space. So excited to chat through those experiences.
Excellent. Nathan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nathan Huber. I'm project management lead at PADT, working beneath Eric Miller. My background is mechanical engineering with a focus in CFD, as well as a background in engineering and project management. And I split my time in our engineering services group, which is our services platform for product development and simulation as a service for customers who need assistance. And I split my effort there between the technical side, should that be CFD efforts, as well as engineering and project management for things that are CFD based or any other physics, any other simulations that we're doing. So happy to be here today and share my experiences at PADT across our breadth of clientele.
Thanks, Nathan. Sam.
Yeah, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be a part of the panel. I'm Sam Cassidy. I work for Call Morris Incorporated, located up here in Marquette, Michigan. That's about 6 hours north of Chicago, so we're quite a bit up here. We are a space logistics company specializing in active debris removal, relocation as a service, and just general in-space manufacturing, supporting that environment. I'm a project manager for the Reach end effector, which is a really neat piece of technology that I would implore all of you guys to look up via some of the links that we'll distribute, as well as a hands-on mechatronics engineer alongside the team here.
Excellent. Very cool. The difficult problem is I want to talk to all of you guys about what you're doing and not project management, but we can come back and do that at another point because that's what you guys are doing. All you guys are doing is amazing, including the stuff I know most about, which is what James is working on. So James, can you share with us what you're up to these days in your background?
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Eric. And yeah, glad to be here. My name is James Villarreal. I'm a recovering engineer and then retired Raytheon, where I was in engineering, supply chain, and program management, and then left in 2021 to start NobleWorks, which is really building a lot of advanced rocket motors, including some of the new ones like rotating detonation engines, but also, we mix, cast, pour, and test solid rocket motors, doing liquid rocket engine testing today. We've done solid fuel ramjets, liquid fuel ramjets, a little bit of everything. So if it makes fire, I'm pretty interested in it. So appreciate being here, and yeah, happy to be here.
Great to have you. Yeah. So what we've got here is a group of folks that have worked in large companies and small companies and, worked as a contractor for other people, are doing contract work for other people. And project management is an important part of getting things into space. And I'm going to assume people kind of know the basics of project management. And one of the most important parts is milestones, right? So you decide this is a thing I need to get done, and this is when I need to get it done, right? So let's start off the questions with, what strategies do you guys use to ensure that the milestones are ambitious, right? So you got to make sure that you're not sandbagging it, but also achievable. And with space, that's quite difficult, right? It's not as simple as designing a consumer product or even a medical device. So, who wants to jump in on that and talk about how you pick your milestones?
Yeah, I can go ahead and jump in real quick. I
Great.
think one of the biggest pieces that's important while developing your milestones is figuring out with your customer what they care about the most, right? Certain customers want to get through design reviews, certain customers want to get hardware prototyped or on orbit. And so I think trying to figure out what the milestones are really critical for the customer first, and then coordinate with engineering on what realism looks like. I think that's probably one of the biggest ones. So that way you're having some reach into the business development world. So as a program manager, you're not just getting stuck with a list of milestones that you may not always agree with. So being involved as early as possible, but then making sure you're looping in the right engineers to make sure that those milestones are rooted in credibility as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
and,
pull on that a little
mm-hmm.
bit. Sorry, Eric.
No, go ahead.
I think once and again, you're talking to at that point, kind of initial, set of stakeholders and figuring out what those milestones are. I think what we've seen in a lot of what we've done is associated with those milestones. It's really making sure that you're figuring out what your minimum viable product is, for each one of those milestones, and then making sure as you're attacking those milestones, as undoubtedly it will happen when there's feature requests or additional scope creep or things like that, just making sure to call that for what it is, call a spade, and keep focus on the minimum viable product, but keep a list of all those feature requests and additional things, so that you can pivot as necessary if enough stakeholders need some of those scope creep things to happen, address the repercussions in terms of trying to get those done, and what's the cost and what's the schedule impacts when that undoubtedly happens.
And one thing, and James, you've been on both sides of the fence as the customer and as the provider. I think with the shift to commercial space, it used to be that the OEMs, the big guys, would kind of tell you what your milestones were, right? That's changed. You got to come up with your own now, right?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, you have to come up with your own, and have to be, I think the word you said was achievable. And it's really easy, especially when you're the president of a company or something else. You're like, well, we're going to do this, and by month 6, we're going to get here, and then we're going to be in space by launch 8. And, especially when they're doing the proposal from the government side, they know what is achievable, right? So if you go and do something just far off, it's not going to work. That's probably not going to work. They're going to know, and they're going to pass you over pretty quick in a proposal. And then, yeah, it's the big OEMs, government, they usually tell you what you want. And then I try to bucket them into, you have your requirements and you have your desirements. And I think what Nathan was trying to say is like, hey, keep a list of those desirements in there, but that's scope growth, and that can get away from you real quick. What are the actual requirements, of deliverables, the milestones that I need to hit, that I can hit, and still be, a financially viable company by the end of the contract? So there's a lot of
Yeah.
pushback. I mean, you have to push back on some of those sometimes, to OEMs and to the customer. That's not a bad thing. I think that's just part of the deal.
The process. Yeah, one thing I know that we've had to learn quite a bit is it's okay to say no. It's okay to say we need to talk about this, right? As engineers, we want to make everybody happy and find a way, and something's impossible. And setting milestones is important. Sam, do you have anything to add to the milestones?
Yeah, I'd love to add. One thing that I've found that's really important with milestones is making sure that they're tangible and meaningful, especially when you're cascading down to the larger team. Meaningful milestones and the communication of that is really important to assigning impact to these. If you were to identify steps in this process, you could say milestone A is important because it unlocks X, Y, and Z, and communicating that to the team, I would say, is exponentially important to just putting impact to these. There's nothing worse than just having milestones on paper that you don't really understand, and maybe there's not a return on it. So I just wanted to exemplify that aspect to milestones.
Really, really important. And James brought up a good point. When you're doing proposals to the government, especially, we use the word when we ask the question, that it needs to be ambitious as well, right? And achievable and ambitious. They also don't want to fund something that they already have, right? So you got to walk that fine balance and ask the customer if the milestones are, if you get that question and answer period while you're creating the proposal, ask them, these reasonable milestones. I think is a really good thing. A theme that we're going to hear over and over again that came up a couple times was communication. And Sam, you just brought it up. Like, how do you flow that down? So I want to dig a little bit deeper into that. I mean, okay, let's say you've got your milestones. These are the things we're going to do in order to get to launch, right? So how do you make sure that everybody from the guy that cleans your office need to know what those milestones are, up to your customer know what the milestones are. So anybody want to share some tips and hints on how to communicate those clearly? Do you do it all at once? Do you remind people? Do you do a constant flow of where we are versus milestones? What's your approach?
Yeah, absolutely. Love to jump in.
Yeah.
I would say it actually takes two different aspects depending on your role. So I would say it's best to occasionally have those large scopes. Here's what the next year looks like for myself and the team, breaking that down into a couple sub milestones, maybe 3 or 4, but also reminding the team about the upcoming milestone, so we don't get that tunnel vision on the entire scope of the project. I do believe, just based on your role, that dictates your view on the project. So the project manager should stay zoomed out, as well as having purview of the upcoming milestone. But just keep reminding the team about what's right in front of them, building out those reliable plans so you can make those ambitious milestones come to fruition.
Cool. You guys have anything to add to that? Nathan, why don't you share what we do to kind of make sure people know, our customers know where the milestones are?
Well, yeah. So I think, and again, kind of going towards, kind of setting that plan and executing it, is when it comes to communication, I guess what I really like to do is just keep communicating and foster that environment where, stakeholders are comfortable doing so. If things are going well, communicate. If there's issues and struggles, communicate. And how we like to do that is, we do kind of a standard weekly update where we're updating the whole team on, hey, here's a budget, here's like a blurb about what's happened, good, bad, indifferent, and then try to be more intentional about meetings. Of course, meetings are great when they're needed. However, we see on a lot of projects, with a given standing meeting, sometimes maybe a small percentage of that meeting time is actually mutually beneficial on the project, and otherwise it's a bunch of headcount for an hour plus which could be time spent on the technical side. So we like a relatively standard weekly update that is pretty simple to get out by the project lead, and meet with the greater team as applicable.
Anybody else want to add anything about communicating in the milestone space or just in general? Okay, cool. So let's switch a little bit here. We're going to talk. So most of our audience are probably in startups or small companies, right? And when you're building it in your garage, which some of you have done, I'm sure, yeah, you don't. It's just you and maybe your kids helping you to hold some wrenches. You don't need much of a project management tool set. So, what advice would you give a company that's kind of moving from that garage phase into, okay, we got a contract now, we got to meet these milestones, we got to get stuff done? What do you recommend as a place to start and getting some tools? Should they go out and buy a project management tool? Should they learn Microsoft Project? Should they use Excel? Should they write it down? What's some advice out there for folks?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab. And I think, especially for companies as they're growing and don't want to spend a ton of money on large tool sets, I think a lot of people will default to say like Microsoft Project to track schedules. And I think there's a lot of really good cloud-based options. One of the ones that we use right now is Smartsheet. It's pretty low cost and cloud-based in terms of the collaboration nature of being able to share schedules. Kind of also double tapping on what you were talking about in the last question as well, which is project. Oftentimes there's one keeper of the Microsoft project file, but when something like Smartsheet exists, you can actually expose that schedule to everybody within the team and make sure that they're tracking along. They can comment features, things like that. Also make updates, which is its own little spicy difference when people go in and make changes to the schedule and maybe they don't. So you can lock that down if you need to. But I think whether it's that or looking at obviously the Microsoft suite of 365 and kind of the Teams Outlook, and there's not a lot of it's really easy to stand up a project management team, I think, these days, especially with like SharePoint and things like that, to make sure you have file structures all kind of aligned. So definitely, I don't think it takes a ton of capital to do that for companies as they're standing up and as they start to grow teams into the low tens count probably is when it starts to make the most sense. But there are these tools that are cloud-based and really accessible, I think, now.
Great. Anybody else have a recommendation for new folks?
I'll jump in there real quick because this is one of the things I feel like maybe we did right when we started the company is you have to have the end in mind and exactly to that point where there's some cloud-based structures, there's some everything else. Investing in some of the IT up front, it doesn't have to be expensive. It can be pretty cheap. But knowing that, especially in the space you're in, it might be ITAR controlled. It might be this. You're going to have SharePoints all over the place. Like managing that data is really important in setting up those file structures so that everyone can find it and find out what they're looking for and it's secured. That's a big thing to do. Like, so as you're starting to level up, you need to understand that part of it. And then the other part of it that maybe we didn't always do so well is the same thing, but on the financial structure. And, I know we don't love time cards and everything else, but cash flow will become everything. So you're going to have to start really managing, reading the fine print in the contracts and really start managing your finances and your burn rates. And whatever tool you use to get that done is fine. I have Premium on SolidWorks. I have AutoCAD, but the amount of drawing I do in Microsoft PowerPoint is incredible. So it's like whatever works for you guys. It's no panacea here. Right tool for the right job.
Well, and kind of to that point, it's find the right level of project management so that you're not trying to incorporate project management structures from companies that are 500, 1,000, thousands of people, because you don't want to hinder progress. And I think part of that is being flexible, being comfortable and saying, okay, I don't know, and use your network and ask other people, how they've done it and their lessons learned and how best to do that. And then when something comes up where, there's a lesson to be learned, learn from it, pivot and improve.
Anybody else have some suggestions, Sam?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. So I want to echo, the use of project, et cetera, for overall Gantt timelines. But one important aspect that I believe in is with these project management tools is communication with your larger team. And making sure that you have that feedback loop open for how's this working out for you guys. I tend to sometimes get into a little bit of a silo where I'm like, this is working great. And then I'll have somebody on the, I'll ask somebody on the team, what do you think about this as somebody that's assigned tasks out of the system? And a few times it's turned out to be non-ideal. We've had to change systems, and that brings me to my next point is not being afraid to change. By no means do we need to be stuck into one system. Is it a good lift to change your project management style? Absolutely. But I can attest after making several changes to best fit the team, it's absolutely worth it in the long run.
So it's a really good point. And I'll add one of the things that I had to learn the hard way is it doesn't really matter. You're not going to find the perfect tool, right? And I think what Nathan said is really important. You got to use the tool to the level you need it. And what's more important than having the perfect tool is making sure everybody's using it and everybody's on board with it. And if it's not working, changing, right? So I think sometimes we get kind of obsessed with the features and functions as engineers in a given tool set, whether it's homegrown or web-based. And then we spend all our time on that and not everybody's using the tool. So I think it's a good tool is one that everybody's using, everybody on board with. So yeah, we could talk about this topic. Each of these topics we could talk about for a long time, but I want to move on. I thought of a question that I think we need to add into this discussion, which is kind of fundamental. So you guys keep bringing up things you do for project management. Manage the schedule, establish the milestones, figure out what available resources they are, understand the financial situation. What are the important things that project management does? And as an engineer that wasn't a fan of project management when I was a grunt cubicle driver, right? As far as I was concerned, all they cared about was whether I was done on Friday, right? And I thought they just spent all day playing with schedules in Microsoft Project. And I've learned, of course, that's wrong. So what else do project managers do? And I think maybe some of the folks who haven't done project management might not know. So I'll start with you, James. What other tasks do project managers do besides just schedule?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. And I would say, especially my former kind of career, the amount of time I wanted to play with engineering all the time when I was a program manager. But a lot of the hard problems that really needed to be solved are the ones that probably go underappreciated. It was constantly, it was finance, it was contracts, it was personnel, human resources. You're always fighting for people. You're always, someone's going to some other programs, you're doing this. You spend a lot of time really getting into the details of finance, contracts, and personnel. Probably spend 50% of my day doing those three things.
Contracts is an important one that I like to delegate to our project team because I'm not good at that. Anybody else want to add?
I think one of the other big ones is the supply chain side. A lot of times the engineers are blocked by supply chain, and it might be a prototype part or even a production part. And from a project management standpoint, being able to step in and work with supply chain, pick up the phone, talk to the supplier, unblock those kinds of things is super helpful, because a lot of times people may not have the context on, especially on the supply chain team, on when something actually needs to come in. There's always a need date on a PO, but if it slips 1 or 2 days, they sometimes might feel that's okay. But being in the loop there to know when a part is super critical to your schedule, to be able to follow that along and keep checking in with the supply chain team, or depending on what sort of systems your companies might have, follow it along in the ERP system, if that's a thing that you have, to just be aware of what parts your engineers need for their critical path as well.
Yeah, that's part of the making those milestones, right? Is making sure. I think one way to think about it sometimes is you've got a process, and things don't necessarily naturally flow through the process, or they get stuck. And sometimes the project manager is just watching it from that higher view and going, "Oh my gosh, we've got a traffic jam here. I need to get in there and fix that." Right? So anybody else have anything to add to that?
I think part of jumping in there and fixing that, and that's a really good point, is where the project leads, especially in a small environment, need to jump in and help out on the technical side where possible, to free up the technical folks to continue progress where they can. And I think, again, in addition to jumping in and lending a helping hand on the technical side, it's then, as those things come up, going back to everything else we've been discussing is make sure to communicate those small things, the couple days of slip, even if it's an email where we say, hey, right now, we're going to have a couple days of slip in that weekly update. You've gotten that out, everybody, all the stakeholders are involved. And then the following week, update everybody on that situation. Was it just a couple days, or now is it a bigger issue? And that way, these small things that the project lead might be helping out with, as they would grow, they don't grow in a vacuum and then are a huge problem for everybody. Everybody's in the loop and everybody can decide, kind of, is there a pivot? Is there a redirection? What do we need to do to solve these issues?
Yeah, good. Very good points. Anybody else have anything on that topic? It's a lot. It's a lot. And every day's different, right? I think that's something we can say if you're doing project management is you come in the morning with maybe a checklist in your head of what you're going to do, and you're lucky if 2 of those get knocked off, right? And I think another important thing that kind of everybody brought up that we haven't explicitly said is often the project lead or project manager is the contact with the customer as well. Every project's a little bit different, right? And I think it's really important to establish for the customer who that person is, but in general, that project lead is the single source of truth for the customer interaction, and it's really important to remember that. And so it's an important role, right? I think I want to talk about well, the thing that we all brought up that we don't want to talk about, and that's scope creep. It is what keeps project managers up at night, right? It is what ruins their perfect work breakdown. And it happens. I can't think of a project where it didn't happen, right? So who wants to talk about how they identify it, what tools or processes or methods they used when they see the project scope creeping? Sometimes you can say no. That's the easiest, but what do you guys do when you got to deal with that? Sam, you want to start on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Scope creep, it happens to all of us, and it happens on pretty much every single project. I think we're all engineers because we like the different features of things, and we like the intricate natures of a lot of these projects. And it's easy to say I want to accept them all. I laugh at Thomas in the chat here. He works with me. Engineers obsessed with features, never. That's who we are by our nature. One thing that we've done here.
Wouldn't it be cool if?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm the worst violator of that too. One thing that we do here at KMI is we like to, when we're assigning features for a particular project or product, we assign a lot of values to them. Is this feature 80% of our 80% benefit, but 20% of the time and the money? Then absolutely, let's accept that one. Is this other feature 20% of the benefit, but 80% of the time and money? I find that assigning those values and those ratios for what are we getting versus what are we giving is a great way to manage that scope creep. And that really ends up setting the scene for the overall project. And you find that a lot of these decisions are made and you just need to find the decision itself. When you break things out into their elements, the answer is pretty clear most of the time.
Yeah. That's a great suggestion. Giving it a score. For those that are not super familiar with the process, the product development process, what we do is we create specifications that say these are features and why these features exist, and then we design to those specifications and ranking those features or specifications. That's a great idea, grading them. Who else has got some tips and tricks for dealing with scope creep?
I think one of the big things about scope creep is it's not always a bad thing, right? I think sometimes there's some really cool things you can help a customer out with. And then so being able to lean in and work with them on exactly what it is they want, but being clear about the cost or schedule impacts as quickly as you can be, will really, I think, have the customer have a good experience. And so the sooner you can be like, hey, like we're happy to lean in, work with you guys on this, but it might impact this schedule or might impact that cost, just to be transparent and clear with them. They always appreciate that upfront, and then that way you can actually talk about what the trade space is around what their request to you is going to be.
Yeah, that's where I really like what James said, phrasing it as scope growth rather than scope creep. Where it is, it's undoubtedly, you know, those things coming up, and you know what we like to do when we're proposing efforts is try to be really clear on those initial, you know, features as part of the minimum viable product, and what were our assumptions. And undoubtedly, there will be things that come up that clearly flaunt that initial plan, but there will also be the things that aren't, you know, discreetly called out in that initial plan. And so part of that is when those come up is just having the conversation and saying, hey, I don't feel like this was part of the original scope, but you know, you other stakeholder, did you think this was part of it? Because honestly, we didn't plan, you know, the resourcing and the cost and schedule associated with this specific thing. And it's really then, you know, figuring out how is that something you need to execute on now? Is that something that goes on the list for, you know, another phase of the project where we go, okay, we're going to focus on the minimum viable product, and then we're going to have this really nice list of the desirements of the next features that are really enticing for, you know, a follow-on effort. And so, yeah, you know, you just gotta, again, it comes, you'll notice I'm always coming back to communicate. When something comes up, communicate.
Yeah,
And we have a formal process. We call it a PCOR. I can't remember what that stands for, but it's a request to change the PO, basically. So you ask for these things. This is going to cost more. You got to give us a authorization to do it, and we've got a formal process for that. James, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I don't think this is a bad thing. I'm on that train. I'm like, oh, so you want some more things? Awesome. And it's really easy for engineers to talk to each other, but like, hey, I don't have contractual authority, blah, blah, blah. Let me bring in the program manager. Let me bring in contracts. Let me bring in finance. And then, you know, you just turn that into a little sidecar contract or an upper or anything else. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. They want something else and they want to pay for it, then by all means, let them pay for it. But you
And
just got
if
to call it
not,
out and be like, hey, guys, I think
yeah.
that might be some growth. Let's add it to the contract and get moving.
So two cautionary things there. If not, it's important to document I like that term desirement, because you can come back to it in the next phase, right? And then the other thing is where we've gotten in trouble before is the engineer said, "Go for it. I'll get the paperwork. My boss is on board. We'll get you the authorization, but you know, to meet the schedule, you guys need to start on this now." And we happily go down the road to do the work, and then the boss goes, "I didn't authorize that. There's no budget for this. No, we're not going to pay you for that." So do be careful. Make sure you do get it in writing. And an email from an engineer is not in writing. They don't have authority. So it's we've had to negotiate settlements with getting paid partially or sometimes full, but partially on that. So cool. So I like that. That's another good takeaway is don't call it scope creep, call it scope growth. I like that. That's a more positive attitude. That's good. So speaking of which, you know, how do we measure project success? Of course, hitting your milestones on time and on budget is really, really important. But for space in general, whether you're going to launch or whether you're just doing a proof of concept, the planet side, you know, what do you consider success for you from a project standpoint? You want to take that, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my mind, success is predefined at the start of a project as well. And if the project is properly defined, that success criteria may change a little bit, but it's aware to the overall team from the beginning. For example, at the end of this contract, we will deliver X, Y, and Z will perform as such. Y will perform as such. When you break things out into measurable and tangible items like that, success is very easy to determine. And I will say at the end of a project, there's no better feeling than going down the checklist and saying, these 20 things that we committed to, we completed all 20 because of these tangible milestones and tangible features. I would say there's a little difficulty when we assign vague definitions to something like, yes, it should work great. Well, what is working great? But so defining that, I think it works best for yourself as a project manager and for your team as well, because you can celebrate the victories then.
Yeah, I think one of the other
Good
things
point.
that I would kind of add there for what is success, of course there's delivering what you planned on. I think the projects that have been the most fulfilling for me in terms of success are both hitting those milestones as well as the customer being happy and being an advocate for the whole process. And okay, sure, you could deliver what you agreed upon at the beginning, but maybe it wasn't a great feeling from the customer, and they're not going to go out and advocate for, hey, I loved working with PDT on this project. Like we struggled with some things, but we handled it really well. We executed, we finished, and then they become an advocate for you and your company. So on the softer side, it's again, it's communicating. It's having those conversations, whether they are good, bad, or indifferent. And that keeps, I think, everybody, in a good mood throughout the project, even when there's things that are tricky and difficult.
Yeah, and Nathan, I'll say that I think one of the best ones at the end then is a follow-on contract, right? That's not a milestone in there, but that's pretty nice to have when you're doing that proposal. You're already talking about the next job when you're halfway through that one, keeping the customer happy, getting that follow-on contract, that feels pretty nice. So I'll leave it at that.
In our case, I want to dig into that a little bit more, because in our case, often the customer is a small business that's doing work for the government. But if you're doing work for the government, the biggest measure of success is that your project person there, the program manager, whatever they're called in that agency, sees you as a go-to resource, right? And you see companies that continue to win contract after contract after contract, and that's because those folks know, if I give these guys a project, they're going to get it done. Or if it's not doable, they're going to tell me it's not doable, and we're going to fix it, right? And so they're like everybody else. They're looking for, they've got goals, they've got milestones, they've got things they need to achieve, and they're going to go with the small if they're working with small companies, they're going with the small company that they've de-risked. And that's a good way to look at it. If you've been successful, you've now de-risked working for them. And for those of you trying to get government funding for things, even SBIRs, getting those follow-on SBIRs is to a large extent measured by your success on that first one, and whether you made that team happy, and made, not just delivered on the paper, but made them successful in whatever they're trying to achieve. So good points. Anybody else have anything to talk about success?
Yeah, I'd love to jump back in to actually look at something in the Q&A. Question
please.
for metrics for success and identifying the road to what led you there, and if there was any improvements along the way. Something my team started doing, it was actually inspired by a colleague of mine, after a project, is called an after action report. So the team sits down and we all have an individual sheet on this larger Excel, where we look at what were the expected outcomes, and that's not pre-described as the project manager, is what did you as the engineer understand at the beginning of this project? What were the actual outcomes? What can be improved? What went well? And then lessons learned. And most importantly, putting together an action plan. So yes, sometimes success is we achieved it. Sometimes that road is pretty bumpy. And I would say if you have that debrief after a project, that after action report of any shape and size, or whatever works best for your team, that identifies what improvements you can make to that path so you can do it better and more efficiently next time.
That's such a good point. And wow, I think it's really, really important to consider this. I used to call them postmortems, which is not a good name. That means after death, right? But we now call them closeouts for the project. And that should be part of your product development process. And it's the job of the project manager to make, or lead, to make sure that gets done, because nobody wants to do it. Everybody wants to move on to the next project, right? And it's such an important tool to help you grow and get better. That's a great one. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, cool. I love it. This is good stuff. And we'll get to questions in a few minutes. I think we got time for one more from me before we open it up. And one of my favorite things to always ask is, what is your favorite horror story in project management? Like what is a situation that went south and why did it go south? And what advice can you give so people can avoid it in the future? Who wants to start on that? Anybody?
I can
Nathan,
go
you
ahead
wanna
and
go?
start with my own personal horror
Okay, go
story
ahead,
here.
Sam. Yeah.
So in a previous life here, I used to manage individual components for a manufacturing company. And there was outposts in China and Mexico and different manufacturing locations. And we dealt with a little bit of that scope growth where it got out of control. And we essentially allowed too many alterations to the overall product to where our overall timeline slipped. And it was a brutal lesson to learn, but unfortunately, we were no longer able to ship this large die that was about the size of a minivan from China to Mexico via boat. We now had to fly it. And it would pain me to tell you how much 25% of a 747's capacity costs. But that was something we had to learn. We had to learn the hard was scope growth. While the overall product did benefit, absolutely. Admittedly, we were already meeting the previous objectives, so we could have avoided that costly shipment. So that was my own personal horror story, and it was a lesson I learned maybe 8 months into my career, and I've never repeated anything of the sort. So it's a good lesson.
Good one. Yeah. We have another one. Nathan, you want to go?
I'll let Narav go. Narav's.
Yeah, sorry. I had one.
Go ahead.
I think there's all kinds of fun manufacturing ones. I think is where we're gonna head. Mine's also a manufacturing one. In a previous life, also developing kind of modules or units that were getting shipped out. Another early stage company, and essentially we pushed to get this unit ready for a shipment over the weekend. It was going to get couriered to the Midwest from the Los Angeles area, and kind of getting the truck ready to go at 3 p.m. on a Friday. We get the component ready to go, shipped ready, kind of through quality checks and loaded up onto the truck. And then the truck starts to leave, and we're looking through the end item data package, and then notice that there's actually 2 of the same serial number. And so when it's headed to a customer, probably not a great look to have 2 of the same serial number. So having to call them back, get the driver to turn around. One of the fun facts about 3PLs or logistics is that you often don't hire your direct driver. It goes through multiple different organizations. And so trying to get in touch with the actual driver took us about 2 or 3 hours. And then they need to turn around about 2 or 3 hours back to LA. And so about midnight, we're swapping the units and then shipping it out. So double check paperwork before it leaves the door is kind of the lesson there, especially when it's a critical shipment for prototypes.
Yeah.
Let me highlight that before you go, Nathan, because when I asked the question, what other stuff do project managers do? Project managers call to get the truck to turn around and then swap out the part at midnight, right? This is the kind of problem solving that the project lead has to do. Yeah, Nathan.
Exactly.
Yeah, so my story is, again, it was a product design project, and my background being more on the simulation side. It speaks to working with different technical individuals, working with people that are really well seasoned on simulation. They know what they're doing, they execute, no issues. This was a product development project that the minimum viable product had a lot of functionality and a lot of features, and some other requests did sneak in, and then safety measures were required. And it's this one was really, we hadn't broken the project down into those executable milestones, and we were really looking at the overall project going, okay, how are we doing overall, comparing that to the overall budget, and the engineer spending the time to solve the issues in design and adding safety features and things like that. And by the time we had the spidey sense really go off, we were within a couple $1,000s of the end of the budget, and we have far more than a couple $1,000s worth of effort remaining. We had used those weekly updates and had noted months prior, hey, we're a little bit worried about this total budget. And then it, kind of came to fruition that, maybe those weekly updates, in an email inbox can, not necessarily be flagged as important, or they're just kind of be, but we at least had that to fall back on. to point back to for, hey, you know, we did note we were going to have an issue here. And now going forward, you know, making sure that we've got those smaller executable milestones and continuing the communication. And that one was one asking the customer, you know, is this style of communication, you know, working, or do we need to pivot? And you know, the customer noted, hey, no, you were doing a good job. They just, you know, weren't necessarily being read down to the bottom of the email. And that's, you know, down to communication, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, good point. And I'll point out sometimes we get into projects where the core technology doesn't work. So we're maybe doing a proof of concept for them, and we get it all put together and we turn it on. It's like, well, your signal's not strong enough, right? Or your gizmo doesn't actually do what you think it's going to do. And that's the horror stories I think of. And so what we try to do is find those as early as possible. You know, you use simulation if we can, get a prototype done as quickly as possible in the design process. You know, make that a goal, so that if the technology, you know, it's kind of like an MVP, but even before, right? Make sure that technology works before you get too far into the project. That's the other horror story that I can think of through the years. Anybody else have another one? No. Okay. Well, it's we got 15 minutes left, so it's probably a good time to entertain some questions. So one I like is, as project managers, what do you find to be very helpful from your team? What has your team told you has been very helpful that you have done for them? So that's a great question. Anybody want to take that one?
I'll take a first stab. I think one of the biggest things that the teams have told us as program managers or mission managers here at Apex is kind of being that barrier between the customer and the engineering team. Space is generally used to a lot of custom development work for specific satellites, and then here at Apex, what we're really trying to push forward is a product, a set bus that the customers don't get to change too much. And so a lot of the customers that we deal with are used to being able to get deep into the engineering or deep into the processes that we would build the spacecraft with. And that's just not the business model that we're operating with today. And so being the program manager that kind of like that filter from the customer to the engineer, our engineers have said that that's very helpful for them, so that they can enable the time to just focus on developing the hardware or the product itself.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I think, you know,
Nathan?
some of the things that I've had, you know, as you know, speaking to what's been helpful from my team, is, you know, a lot of times the technical side is the first line of defense against, hey, I'm struggling, or this isn't going as well as I thought. And so really just, you know, the technical team or everybody involved in the project, you know, being comfortable in communicating when things don't go as swimmingly as expected. So that's really helpful, because, you know, if the engineer is just kind of head down, struggling, trying to solve the problem, you know, they're not necessarily focused on, okay, yeah, or they're focused on, yes, I need to get this done in 2 weeks. But if they're spending double time, that, you know, potentially has budget implications. And then I think that, you know, the things to go to the second question, what the team has told me that's been, you know, beneficial for them is honestly being flexible on the project management framework. You know, we have our project management tool set, which is called Cantata. And, you know, we break that down into, you know, time trackable tasks, but for different engineers, there's a different level of breaking that into time trackable tasks. Some engineers like a larger bucket and can kind of self-manage effort within that bucket, and some engineers need it to be a little bit more discretized. And so I think it's just, yeah, it's having a kind of a good symbiotic relationship with the technical team and the project lead.
Excellent. Anybody else have anything on that? Cool.
I would say, as a project manager, one thing that I can do that's really beneficial for the team is being that buffer between ourselves and external partners, in the sense for, you know, I would attend the subcontractor meetings and some of the external partner meetings, and I would take, you know, 1 hour's worth of content and turn it into 3 actionable items to be distributed to the team. Whereas they didn't need to pay attention to the full hour's worth of content when there's only 5 minutes worth of takeaways. And that's not to talk down to any of these meetings, not at all. But sometimes just keeping them to the information that's pertinent to them really helps them weed out some of the nuances of the many meetings we all attend a week and just stay on track to the actionable items. I would say that's something I can really do to benefit the team, and that's a relationship that we're always managing too. I'm always checking in with the team of, do you want to be more involved with some of these external partners? Do you want to be less involved? How do we manage that balance to make sure your time is worthwhile?
I love that. James, do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I love the reverse mentoring part of it. That's probably what I get most from my team, which is great. And even when I do a presentation, not like this per se, but I'll put a plant in there, but like, hey, how did that go? Or how did that meeting go? Because everyone's going to see something I didn't. And then along the same lines, it's, you know, how I really get help from my team is I'm not always like they're there right now setting up for tests, and I'm getting all these little text messages and everything else, and I love it because I'm not there, but I can kind of keep an eye on it. So just a constant little flow of, hey, this is going well, this is not, so I can go shoot up the ladder or something, or if there's a problem and I need to know about it, thank you very much. Just like constant little stream of just keeping us involved really helps because I don't know everything.
Well, and you're in the scaling phase, right? So you're growing, and that kind of communication is really, really important because you can't do everything yourself.
Yep.
Yeah. That's so cool. So cool. Okay. So next question. I really like this question. Paraphrasing it, you know, before you started in project management or as a leader of a team, what kind of what did you think was going to be very important, and you found out it really wasn't that important, and vice versa? What kind of surprised you as being important that you didn't expect? I'll give you a second to think about that one. I'll go first. You know, my expectation was that, and I've said this before, project management was all about schedule and budget. And the thing what surprised me was how much of it wasn't. That's really important, but it really wasn't. And the thing that I didn't get my head around until we were really trying to get better at project management was communication. You know, I kind of had the theory that, well, if you have smart customers and smart engineers, you know, people know what they're doing, but you still have to communicate. And yeah, that was my thing. Nirav, you got one?
Yeah, well, I was going to piggyback on what you said. I think going into program management, I realized exactly how much technical background would be super helpful. Some of the big primes, the program managers may not always come from a technical background, and they're more cost schedule focused, like you're alluding to. But at a startup or a smaller company, you really need to have kind of multiple hats on, where you're going to preparation for design reviews or customer reviews, and sometimes maybe the engineering team is just not as deep as it might need to be in. So you need to pick up the slack and poke at the technical content as well to be able to prep them for the customer, while also acting like the customer in that preparation space as well. So definitely thought maybe it'll be very helpful to have as much technical background as you can as you go to the program manager side. And then in terms of, I think there's less time dealing with kind of the internal teams, and I expected to have to deal with internal teams a lot more, but customers can be challenging, we'll say, right? So it's spending a lot more time outward facing, and inward facing is probably what has been something that I wasn't expecting.
Good point. Yeah. Nathan?
Yeah, I think so. When I did, and kind of my project management experience started, you know, I started off at PDT about 10 years ago now. You know, I was, you know, engineer fresh out of a master's degree in mechanical engineering, focused in CFD, you know, working on the technical side. And that's where, again, but at that time, PDT really didn't have a focus in project management. It was, hey, you know, we've got a product development team who had been at the company for a really long time, you know, was good at executing. We had the simulation team, you know, good at executing, but still the things coming up where, hey, you know, we're spending extra time, or we're doing things that weren't necessarily part of the original effort. And that's where I kind of raised my hand to Eric and the other founders and was like, hey, I want to go back to school and do, engineering management master's degree to really get an educational foundation to then apply and get the experiential foundation. And I think in that education, it was really a lot of that, which was a while ago now as well, was, oh, there's going to be a project management framework, and there's just going to be this framework, and you follow that framework, and things are going to go well. And it turns out, you need to be flexible, and you need to, have the right level of project management to make sure that you're, executing and delivering as planned, as well as communicating during that execution. And it really has been a lesson in, leveraging the right level of project management to make sure that everybody's in the loop as you get a idea from ideation to delivery.
Yeah, really good point. Really good point. Anybody else have one? There you go. Very cool. Yeah, and I'll be honest, one of the reasons why we were happy for Nathan to take over is we went over on every project. It was consistent. Every single project we were over budget on. It was obvious that this concept of really smart engineers don't need project oversight is not true. and now we almost never go over. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. All right. Nobody else have so here's a great question. And I don't know how to answer because we don't use it, but I guess we could say Microsoft Teams for this. Do you hate or love Slack / Microsoft Teams / a non-email based chat communication platform? I hate Slack. I'll tell you, I'm not a fan.
I'll take a quick stab at it. So I came from most companies that had Teams, and we have Slack here at Apex. And initially, I hated it, and now I've come to love it. It takes time, and there's definitely a learning curve. I think the thing that frustrated me the most initially was I was just missing a lot of notifications. One of the things that Teams does is Teams is automatically giving you everything, whereas Slack starts with nothing, and you have to start turning stuff on for Slack. And so that was probably one of the biggest challenges. I think the thread feature is probably a little bit more robust in Slack than Teams, and so I think that's been really helpful. But yeah, it's pretty overwhelming, we'll say. But having Slack is overwhelming, especially as the company grows and if people are kind of, maybe litigating is too strong of a term, but using Slack in that way where they're making decisions via Slack and you're getting all kinds of notifications. And so I think it has to be tailored for the user, and you have to really learn how you want Slack to be used. But it's really helpful when a lot of information is there all in one place, and at your fingertips.
Good. Anybody else want to comment on that, Nathan?
Yeah, so I think it's important for, again, using your communication methodologies to the right level. So again, doing the right type of communication in Teams or the right type of communication in Slack, which again, I've never really used Slack, but I'll use Teams to help me, quickly communicate with the engineers to, the end goal of providing my weekly update to the customer, or, getting the right level of information out of the email inbox that, could be missed, and pull for that information in something like Teams or Slack, to help me provide a better update via more official communication methodology. So again, I think it's as I've kind of defaulted back to communication everywhere, it's using the right tools for the right type of communication. Because I can foresee, a lot of stuff happening over on the team side or the Slack side that might need a more official communique to get out of it, and maybe it just lives and dies in Slack or in Teams, and then you've fallen a little flat on the overall communication on the project.
Yeah, and
James.
I'll jump in real quick, and I'm probably horrible at this. But it comes down to your preferred level of communication too. Like, and I think Eric knows this, like, hey, you text me or you call me or you put it on my calendar. Emails, I get a lot of emails, guys. Like it's not gonna work. So whatever works for your team, I think is what Nathan's saying. is probably the right tool. You don't have to overthink it. It's too easy to go overboard, and I'll have Zoom meetings and this and all these other ones, and my computer would just start crashing. So we try to limit that just within our teams, just because over communication is also, I mean, that's just one more way to have a data spill or send something to the wrong person or do everything else. So I try to
invite the wrong person to your
keep
chat.
that down a little bit. Give me a call first, and then we'll follow up with an email.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Sometimes you don't want that in your records, right? You want to have that discussion before you make a decision, right? That's an important thing. And I think another thing that we've learned is you got to use the tool properly. So I don't use Slack at PADT, but I use Slack for a lot of the volunteer work I do in the ecosystem here in Phoenix, and because the software guys love Slack, right? I'm not in it all day. So that's why it doesn't work for me. I realize why you guys are talking. One of the reasons why it doesn't work for me is, one, I'm probably not using the notifications properly, and I don't sit in it proper. I don't sit in it all day. I sit in Teams all day. Nathan has to remind me that I need to do something that I said I'd do yesterday. He sends me a little Teams, boom, it's right there. Right? He has a little question for me, it's right there. I'm not sitting in Slack. So I think whatever tool you use, you need to be in it all day, and be responsive as well. You know, anybody else have anything to comment on that? Because we're kind of out of time, right?
I'm gonna jump in,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah, this is great. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think, the theme for today is communication, communication, communication. And I think, this is a very powerful webinar because strong project management builds confidence with customers, right? So we want to make sure that we are coming on, making sure everybody knows we're organized. We've got this, just giving everybody that confidence that they need. So again, thank you all for joining. And just so that our next event will be a virtual networking event. So please join us for that. We have, hopefully, Annie will be putting that link in the chat here real quick. It's a, fast-paced, fun opportunity to connect with our network. So please join us. We'd love to have you there. Next one after that will be capitalizing on unfunded requests, how to position your company to take advantage of leftover government budget and other non-SBIR and STTR opportunities. We don't have the link for that one yet, but we will soon. So keep your eye on your emails. So make sure to open those Hyperspace emails so you keep getting them and they don't go to your junk. Also, go to YouTube, follow us there so that you can get all of the recordings and things like that. This webinar will be hosted on that YouTube channel as well as on our webpage, and you'll get a link to it after you leave. Please fill out the survey and let us know how we did and how we can improve, and let us know if you have ideas for future webinars. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you again. See you next time.
Thanks, guys. That was great. Great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.